Hey, it's CJ. I'm in my apartment. Okay, so I'm really excited because, if you can't tell from some of my videos, I'm like an ultimate fanboy of genre franchises. The V. I loved it. The practical effects of V. Uh, and so I posted about some. I've been on a course, I should say. I've been on a course for collecting the memorabilia for that. But also, I have a great love for, not everything Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, but certainly everything American Horror Story. And some of the some of the other franchises that they have that sort of kind of feel in that same vibe. Most of the work, well, I tell you, even as a gay man, I don't sit around and just watch like programming with like gay characters like exclusively. That's not my world. It never really was my world. Sometimes when I would go out to a club and everything like that, it'd be like a gay club, and there'd be like lots of gay dudes around and everything like that. But my world is not populated with 80% gay people and 20% heterosexuals. It's almost the opposite of that. If I'm fortunate enough to have that many uh, gay people that I know, or and I use gay as like an umbrella for anything other than heterosexual, uh, uh, which is I know that now they a lot of different people have to identify with like the uh, specifics and everything, uh, and I respect that. But just when I'm talking, and I say gay, I mean just kind of like a overall anything. So anyway, and that's just because when I was coming up, that's just whatever. I mean, no diss by that at all. But so, but I do love talking about Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk productions that they collaborate on. Wasn't too big on the Nip Tuck. I don't even think I've gotten through like a full episode. Um, Glee, I think what it was it's just that by that time I was kind of uh, I liked some parts of Glee. I really particularly love the Gwyneth Paltrow cameos in the first season. I think she came back and did something in the fifth season or something like that with them. But yeah, and then of course she is married to Brad Falchuk. So I liked The Politician, both seasons of it. Uh, I wish it would have been able to go on the course, but there was some rearranging between the company that they were doing that, and it was airing on Netflix, but they weren't Netflix productions. So that property and I think Ratchet uh, uh, is a property that was airing on Netflix exclusively, but it wasn't a Netflix produced uh, property. And so the company that was producing those uh, primarily responsible. I think that that's changed, and there's been some. So we don't know what's coming up in the future of those. But why am I talking about this? So it seems maybe random in case you don't know, but uh, my favorite is American Horror Story, and I think it's just at the time when it premiered, uh, 2010, and nobody knew it was going to take off and be what it is, which is actually pretty good. It doesn't have right now these later seasons. They do not have the punch that the Jessica Lange uh, and Angela Bassett, Kathy Bates, and Sarah Paulson, and of course Evan Peters now too. But at the time he wasn't that big. He wasn't the punch bringer to it either. but there was like those four, and I think it was Jessica Lange at first was like the engine behind that series, why it really took off, uh, because she just played kind of like she became like the nosy next door neighbor that was intrusive, that had like a past history. She was the genre uh, older person that knows the history of what the hell's going on. Every good horror movie needs someone uh, with the history of the event to come in and tell people what the hell's going on. Otherwise, how are they going to know what their boogeyman is? And so Jessica Lange was that uh, in season one, in a very creative way, how they worked it in. But she became like the breakout of that first season. Whereas it was Jessica Lange, of course she's going to, and then she uh, wow, she really stole the show in the second and the third season, and then the fourth season she was kind of like wanting to do some other things. So uh, she was great as Elsa Mars in that fourth season of American Horror Story, but uh, she yeah, you could tell. Hey, I'm kind of sharing the storyline a little bit more. They brought her down a little bit, even though she had a lot to do. They kind of uh, did some redirect. What's going on is that the American Horror Story and that first season didn't it wasn't called Murder House when it first premiered. It was just American Horror Story. And then when they came back with the second season, they were like, hey, we are going to do a second season, and it's going to be American Horror Story Asylum, was the subtitle, which is subtitle is the theme of each season. So everybody says, what's the theme each year? It's Asylum, it's Coven, it's horror show. I'm sorry, freak show. It's whatever. But that so they think, hey, that's the theme. Well, that's great if it's the theme. It's a subtitle. So really, it's a subtitle, uh, or part of the or part of the title, and then the theme of it. So and then I even love some American Crime Story. Uh, I don't eat it up voraciously as I eat up American Horror Story, but I'm excited for it. And so last year we got the first season of a standalone for the most part. Uh, there's the occasional two-parter that I think we'll probably be able to expect, or some callbacks, but we got 3 episodes of Murder House in a 7-season episode that stands alone for the most part of uh, a new single uh, episode. Well, I'm struggling how to say this, but it's an anthology. American Horror Stories is an anthology, and it's like maybe it goes from like 9 to 14 episodes, depending upon. I think those big grand uh, seasons are kind of over with. It's been a long time since. I'll get to this in a second, but it's kind of found and shaped and it's sticking to the average 10 episodes now. But that's American Horror Story, and it tells one major story arc over 10 episodes. With American Horror Stories, plural, each season is giving standalone episodes, with the exception of that first two-parter episode, and then the very final, the finale episode had a callback. It referenced, but there again, that was weird because it was like about a fan being a franchise of the American Horror Story Murder House story in particular, and then there were characters from American Horror Stories, the two-parter, that showed up. So it was American Horror Story, but then it was telling so it was kind of that final episode was referencing. It was not only outside of the main narrative of American Horror Story universe, but it was uh, it was about a fan watching it, and then from there, it was the fan that was watching it uh, through a video game creation was also referencing being a fan of American Horror Stories, which his episode was part of American Horror Stories. So he was kind of like, so it was like a double meta going on there. Like it was cool. It was cool. It was like you know, like if I were to be another person watching me watching this video, and but then somebody else would be watching. It's like degrees of separation. It was so weird. That's kind of what meta means for me. Beyond or degrees of separation or outside of or whatever. So anyway, well, what we're getting tonight, uh, and it's not tonight. It'll actually be early in the morning, probably around 2 a.m. Uh, give or take. Uh, the second season of American Horror Stories. Now, this is the first one. Now, we're still in a pandemic and we're still in a tighter worldwide budget, but that first season was produced on a tighter budget, and it was like, hey, let's see how this works. How does it play off? It does make callbacks to American Horror Story. It does feed in. It is very changeable. Uh, some episodes are into they kind of play to teens, and then some episodes play to a more mature, like the drive-in that played to uh, an audience that would be like high school. It's about high school kids at a drive-in, and what happens in their story. And then you have like there's a young adult, uh, where they're supposedly influencers in a house, bro house, and they were kind of stupid, and uh, it turns into a slasher fest. It was really kind of great. And then there's the more serious, where it kind of gets to, well, I mean, still it doesn't take itself super serious, but there are some episodes that are kind of like, like the one Ball, which was about the fertility god, and that took itself a little bit more serious, and it almost went into some Alfred Hitchcock territory, and then flipped it around again and said, nope, it really is a supernatural story. So there's all sorts of things to go with uh, in that first season of American Horror Stories, and it kind of got, some of it got praised, and then some of it got panned. Basically, people expected it to have the bigger budget that American Horror Story does, and they expected uh, some of the epic overreaching that some of what American Horror Story does in a single episode, and that's not what short storytelling is about. Short storytelling is about small plots, small narratives. I think maybe, uh, they, yeah, I'm excited to see what they're going to do with the second season. You know what I mean? So this is, and some of this, it seemed like a gorier version of some of those earlier horror anthologies. There was Monsters, which was uh, more played down. It was a family oriented macabre show. That's like the, ghoulish makeups and stuff like that, but it wasn't gory. There was Tales from the Dark Side. That was probably one of the best, actually, uh, as far as television goes in the 80s, that did not mind uh, getting a little gritty. You know what I mean? It didn't mind occasionally going a little bit darker, being a little bit more macabre. Um, but this anthology thing goes all the way back to uh, Twilight Zone, maybe even before then. But the Twilight Zone was the big one, the Rod Sterling, where they would tell science fiction stories, they would tell horror stories. They would give it some mystery. Carol Burnett did an episode uh, where a lot of strange things were going on, and she was being the comedian that she is. It was great. It was great. So, that's Carol Burnett on uh, uh, Twilight Zone. Everybody remembers, Captain Kirk with the gremlin on the plane. But you know, um, so this anthology, these single anthologies of American Horror Stories, kind of remind me of that feel, but juiced up and not afraid to get a little gory with it. And if you're lucky, you see a good looking, you know, side boob or a nice, backside. If as I say, it's good to see like uh, beauty in the physical human form, which is cool. It's some of the American Horror Story, they placate to trends a little bit too much. Sometimes American Horror Stories uh, does that too. That the both of the shows, they tend to placate to trends a little bit too much. I can't blame them because they get their fuel from the internet and the fandom that goes along with sharing this. Very much like Sharknado did, how it kept going, because those were awful movies. And if it weren't for, hey, the event of, hey, let's go online and let's watch this and talk about it, uh, live, live events made the Sharknado movies pretty awesome. And then they just embraced their ridiculous stupidity. Like uh, by the second movie, it's like, it's yeah, this is nothing but cheese, and we know it. It's a Sharknado. How could it? But okay, so, uh, but if they were fun, American Horror Story. Some seasons really take itself very, very serious. You know, Murder House was one of those. Even though there were some lighter moments, it was the drama underneath it all that got to the Murder House. And then by the time you get to, and the same for Asylum, the second season. And then you get to um, the third season, and so their production company is like closing down on, they're not going to be doing Glee anymore. Uh, so maybe they kind of mix in, uh, you know, uh, especially by that fourth season. Let's do the occasional musical number, because uh, Ryan and Brad apparently like music. So the whole idea is that it can be a little something different each time, each season, and they still have a great fan base. And so some seasons people love, and then some seasons uh, people don't love, and it tends to all the seasons they get support. Uh, and it's like it's the argument back and forth. Is it a good season? Is it not a good season? That kind of gets that interest in that debate and everything. So switching it up really is what's keeping American Horror Story going. You know, and and then even losing some of the more prominent talent, but getting used to some newer talent, and yeah, it's coming in, and now there's even like which early on they didn't have you know transgender people in the cast, and now they do. Of course, they're not always playing transgender characters. Sometimes they're playing uh, characters that don't necessarily have to be uh, transgender. Uh, I don't know. It doesn't matter that much to me. If someone's a great actor and they can pull it off, throw them into a part and let them play it. Like every other job, if you go to a job, you should be hired for that job based on your ability to carry that job out, regardless of any other factor. And that's how I feel about acting also. Uh, so I don't really care about gender identity or anything like that. So what else am I getting at? When I think about, oh yeah, so Glee. I didn't particularly get into the Glee. I like the Gwyneth Paltrow stuff, and then I got sidetracked from that. We got into American Horror Story, and I loved that. Anyway, so tonight we're gonna see, well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we're gonna see on Hulu, airing only on Hulu, and legally airing only on Hulu legally. Then we'll see this first season of this first episode of the second season, because as each season of American Horror Story changes, each episode of the singular story episode, or the singular episode stories of American Horror Story, each episode pretty much changes and tells a different story. And though it takes place in the same universe, or references the same universe, then what happens can be, I mean, it's, they don't necessarily, they're not telling the same story. They're not, you know, just because they're not just because some of the characters cross over, or make appearances in multiple episodes. Pepper uh, uh, was a favorite. She was in a couple of episodes, and then who else? Any of them. Lana Winters, the reporter, has been appeared in a couple of different episodes, and has been mentioned in some other ones. But they're not all telling the same story, you know. There there was the season 3 Coven, and then the Apocalypse season, and I think because the Coven witches were featured so much in the Apocalypse. Uh, Spoiler alert: they saved the world. Uh, they looked at it as a sequel or a continuation, and they felt so they didn't treat it as a limited series anymore at some of the awards, uh, which may be why, which was going to happen anyway. You go back and reset time, things get a little chaos. So they haven't really addressed in this series at all the with the Coven witches having gone back in time and resetting. What did that do to? They haven't really gone into it, but we do know that we're now addressing some stories. Richard Ramirez, who's been a character who's based on a lot on the Night Stalker, he's been in a couple of seasons. One as a ghost in Hotel earlier, and then later, after the reset, he was a live person, and they rewrote his narrative from life so that he actually did not die in prison, and he keeps dying over and over and over again at a haunted camp because the devil brings him back to life. That's in American Horror Story 1984, which actually spans from 1984 till like 1989. So it's a slasher, and then you get the slasher sequel in that. So, but yeah. So what I think happened was when they stopped regarding American Horror Story as at one point as a limited series, then they needed to switch it up and shake it up, and so that's kind of cool. So, and it did get more anthological, and so now I'm excited for American Horror Stories Season 2, Episode 1, and we'll see it soon. Have a good night, and as always, find and love your passion.